All right, so I think we've already done the introductions, but just really briefly, since we just started the recording, I'm Michelle Colby, the National Program Leader for Animal Biosecurity. Also joining me today is Dr. Amer Fayed, who's the National Program Leader in the Division of Plant Systems Protection, as well as Dr. Ashley Mueller, who's the National Program Leader in the Division of Family and Consumer Sciences. And we'll all be talking today about different programs and areas that NIFA uses to help work with the food and ag sector. So if we can go to the next slide. So just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to set the context a little bit, talking about the food and ag critical infrastructure sector, a brief touch on some policy directives and the interagency process related to those recent policy directives. Ashley will then talk about the Department of Agriculture and our mission and vision. Amer will then talk about NIFA and its vision and mission. And then we will together cover NIFA's Food and Ag Defense Initiative and the programs under that, and a little bit about how those programs coordinate with the broader interagency. And then Ashley and Amer will cover a couple of NIFA security and disaster related competitive opportunities. And then I'll close it out with a couple of slides on applying for NIFA funding opportunities. And then we will be open for questions and comments. And we have quite a few slides, so I apologize. We're probably going to be talking rather quickly. If we go to the next slide, and the next slide, just a gratuitous transition slide. So, you know, the why, how, and what. You know, food and agriculture, which includes plants, animals, forestry, and fiber products, represents a significant portion of the U.S. gross domestic product. And these diverse systems are vast, complex, and all vulnerable to a wide range of threats and hazards. And not, unfortunately, the same, well, fortunately or unfortunately, the same ones across the entire sector. So it's a difficult problem to get our hands around when trying to protect. And there's a wider range of policy approaches employed across the food and ag sector and the federal government with the authority to regulate, support, or work with the food and ag sector to ensure the security and resiliency of the sector. If we go to the next slide. USDA shares leadership role in the food and ag sector with the Food and Drug Administration, which we'll talk about later, but on a critical aspect of the sector is the partnership with the private sector, where we've worked together for the last 15 years to carry out the vision and mission that are laid out on this slide. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them yourselves. And Greg, you're more than welcome to share these slides with those who attended this meeting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. If we go to the next slide. So as I said, we're going to talk about this later. Now's later. The private sector or the public sector works together through the Government Coordinating Council, which includes representation from the federal, state, local, and tribal and territorial governments. It also includes representation from the academic community, as most academic institutions come through the state government. And the Government Coordinating Council meets mostly on a monthly basis and coordinates food and agriculture, security, and resilience strategies to support the nation's Homeland Security mission. And as I mentioned, the Government Coordinating Council is co-led by USDA and the Food and Drug Administration. The Sector Coordinating Council represents the food and agricultural industry, and this is led by two private sector individuals. It's completely independent from the Government Coordinating Council, so it's not controlled by any government entity. And the cadence of their meetings is controlled by the private sector. Most of the communication on a regular basis happens between the leadership of the GCC and the SCC, but the GCC and the SCC membership do meet on a fairly regular basis. They meet at least twice a year. Right now, we're trying to transition back to in-person meetings. When there's a really large event going on or something that needs more direct attention, they will call webinars that are joint to discuss those issues as well. But I think that this is a really key point for the food and ag sector is this interaction between the GCC and the SCC, so that public-private interaction to make sure that everybody's on the same page, both in peacetime, so that we have that relationship, so that we can coordinate when we need to during emergencies and events. We go to the next slide. This slide just lays out all 16 critical infrastructure sectors, which were designated in Presidential Policy Directive 21, and notes that food and agriculture is one of those 16. And I think it's just really important to note that the goal of PPD 21 was to seek to strengthen it and ensure that functioning together, the nation maintains a secure, functioning, and resilient critical infrastructure. So food and ag is one of 16 critical infrastructures. It's important, it's not the be all end all. And the next couple of slides, if we go to the next one, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Because one of the things we learned or became readily apparent during the pandemic and after that were some of the interdependencies that the food and agriculture sector had with other sectors. The chemical sector, for an example, cleaning and disinfectant supplies were critically important to the food and ag sector. Right now, even just this past August, carbon dioxide production has been a continuing problem in the food and ag sector, both for refrigeration and for carbonation of beverages. And this is something that has been an ongoing issue. I go to the grocery store and I still can't find my Oscar Mayer beef bologna because it, for some reason, has been affected beyond all other bolognas. Critical manufacturing sector in multiple ways, from farm equipment to packaging to means of transportation. If we go to the next slide, healthcare and public health has been an issue across the food and ag sector, as well as transportation. And transportation is one that's impacted not just by the pandemic, but across multiple disasters. The winter weather in 2021 here in Texas created havoc with the transportation system, and energy was on the last slide. That was another area that was affected by winter weather, by other natural disasters as well. Water and wastewater is often impacted by natural disasters. If we go to the next slide, rather than looking at interdependencies, we look at commonalities with other sectors. And one commonality that was readily apparent across all sectors is human capital. And all critical infrastructures are dependent on the essential critical infrastructure workforce. And this was something that the food and agriculture sector, as well as all the other sectors, worked with the Department of Homeland Security to identify this essential critical infrastructure workforce during the pandemic in a series of lists that were updated and utilized by states in various ways to say these are the essential critical infrastructure workers who need some level of freedom of movement during the pandemic. And it was a really interesting exercise to go through with the food and ag sector, but to watch all the other sectors do this and to see those lists and how they were utilized in each different state. Beyond that, researchers in the academic environment who develop new tools, technologies, study interdependencies, and train the workforce. And everybody is concerned with stability of the supply chain. And I think it's really important to point out that that's not just the primary inputs into the supply chain, but the secondary and tertiary inputs. So I mentioned cleaning supplies, carbon dioxide. Those aren't primary inputs into the supply chain, right? And again, as I just pointed out, those are often related to those critical infrastructure interdependencies. We go to the next slide. So we face a lot of challenges in the sector. We have a global food supply. We were just talking before the meeting started about movements across the border. We have a lot of things moving across the border, and diseases do not respect borders or walls or doors. Traditional security measures may not be effective. These are vast and open systems, as I pointed out earlier, And these animal and plant pathogens and pests and possible adulterants are readily available if somebody is considering something that is not natural but intentional. And at the beginning of an outbreak or onset of an illness, it may be difficult to determine if an event is naturally occurring or intentional, unless someone is actually stepping forward to take responsibility. If we go to the next slide. So that's one of the reasons why it's as I mentioned before, that relationship between the SEC and the GCC, that communication is really important. But more than that, that involvement of all the stakeholders, the USDA agencies, the Executive Office of the President, all the other federal departments and agencies, the SLTT community, and the private sector is really important. This is an area where the phrase, many cooks might spoil the pot, is not true. It's we can accomplish more together than we could separately. If we go to the next slide. Especially when we're dealing with an evolving threat landscape. It's not just infectious diseases, but extreme weather events, including wildfires and hurricanes, but also drought and earthquakes and cybersecurity threats and theft of intellectual property. If we go to the next slide. So, you know, in facing all of these, the White House has been active in putting forward some new policy directives, and I'll talk a little bit about those if we go to the next slide. So here we see the cover sheets from two of the most recent. National Security Memorandum 15, which is the implementation plan for the National Biodefense Strategy. So the strategy itself was published under the Obama administration. The implementation plan was published the end of last year. And then National Security Memorandum 16, which is the National Security Memorandum on Strengthening the Security and Resilience of U.S. Food and Agriculture. And this was published, I believe, in November of last year. So these two together really cover the totality of preparedness and resilience across the food and ag sector. From the biodefense strategy is really focused on the infectious disease side of things. The resilience to food and ag, for the food and ag sector, covers a much broader swath, including kind of the risk assessment to look at what are the preeminent risks we need to focus on, but the breadth of the policy covers any threat that might be a concern within the sector. If we go to the next slide. So again, in terms of accomplishing more together than we can separately, this multi-sectoral approach is really critical. Each department and agency's equities are unique. All threats are being considered regardless of source, and it's really important from a multi-sectoral approach to look at this from a One Health perspective because we need to look at all aspects of this impact. We move to the next slide. This word cloud just looks a little bit at how USDA contributes to NSM 15 and 16. If we had a longer presentation and more time to spend with you all today, I would have more slides on each of these different things, but you see on here Plum Island, the new National Bio and Agro Defense Facility. Obviously from NIFA, the research is very near and dear to our heart. Vaccine, biologics are both things that come in from the research and the regulatory aspect, both extramurally funded research as well as intramurally conducted research. Response from the APHIS side of things, disease surveillance, international collaborations, import permits, safeguarding, etc. If we move to the next slide, I get to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Ashley for a little bit.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. So a little history lesson here, it won't be long, but just to share that in 1862, President Lincoln signed into law an act of Congress that to establish the United States Department of Agriculture. And about 2.5 years later, in what would be his final address to Congress, he referred to USDA as the People's Department. And the work that we do today holds as true as it did then, is that the USDA touches the lives of every single person in this country every single day. Truly are the People's Department. Next slide, please. So what do we do at the USDA? Well, we provide leadership on a variety of areas: food, agriculture, natural resources, rural development, nutrition, and related issues. And really, our vision is to provide economic opportunity for rural America, as well as ensure that our natural resources are cared for. Next slide. So how do we do this? This is our compass, our USDA strategic plan. I'm not going to go through all of the strategic goals for the sake of time, but just to note that we address everything from climate change to equitable, resilient, prosperous agriculture systems, expanding economic opportunities, and improving quality of life. We'll provide the slide so you'll be able to look a little further into our strategic plan if you're interested on the link. Next slide, please. So many people may not realize how large USDA is. And so I know maybe it's a little small here, a reason for sharing the slides, but you can see, right, just on this slide alone, right, how much there is. And just to note that we in USDA address the mission areas of other agencies, but we do it with a rural focus or a rural lens. So everything from, food and nutrition service and the important work of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Disaster SNAP, to the Forest Service, to rural development. Our mission area at the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture is in the mission area of research, education, and economics. So if you're looking at the screen, it's the second from the right on the bottom. We're in good company with the Office of the Chief Scientist, the Agricultural Research Service, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, as well as the Economic Research Service. And our main focus is to support innovation and collaboration to provide information to the people who need it most so that they can make decisions about themselves, their families, their businesses, their operations. And so we're really about innovation and collaboration and finding solutions to problems that Americans face every day. Next slide. All right, Amr.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation to meet with you in person and also virtually. So it's my pleasure to talk to you a bit about NIFA. If we can go to the next slide, Craig. So NIFA is, as you are probably well aware, is the extramural research funding agency of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Congress has entrusted us with more than 70 funding programs through a variety of topics that we will be highlighting a couple this morning with you. So we provide funding mainly through capacity or formula and also competitive grant programs. And our team is we're building our team. You know, we heard about the transition from Washington, D.C. to Kansas City. So NIFA has been really hard at work in rebuilding its workforce. So our aim is to be back to almost full staff at 400 staff member for full capacity. And I will say that we are scattered throughout the country, and most of us work virtually. So. We do all these activities through a very focused mission and vision. And our mission is to really invest in advanced agricultural research, education, and extension to solve societal challenges. And our vision is to lead innovations across the nation through transformative discoveries, education, and engagement with our stakeholders to, again, address these challenges. Next slide, please. So NIFA invests in and supports initiatives that ensure the long-term viability of U.S. agriculture, and NIFA provides funding and strategic leadership for programs that ensure groundbreaking discoveries in agriculture-related sciences and technologies that reach the people who will put them into practice. And we do all of this work with a real partnership with all our federal, state, and other stakeholders as well. Next slide, please. So how does NIFA do or achieve this mission and vision? So we do these through research, education, and extension programs that cover a wide range of topics. And these topics range from advanced technologies to animals, to plants, to business and the economy, natural resources, food and nutrition security, food science, farming and ranching, education, human sciences. For my friend Ashley here, of course, this is really important to really integrate the social sciences with the natural and biological sciences. And we really make sure that we take all these factors in formulating our programs and the delivery, and also in the extension component of the work that we do. And to some extent, also, we are involved in some international activities as well. So next slide, please. And I would say we do all this work by catalyzing, transformative research and innovations and also innovative education and delivery mechanisms. Ashley talked about the USDA strategic plan. So NIFA published its strategic plan for 2022-2026. The plan was published later in last year. Again, I'm not going to read all the 6 strategic goals, but I'll say that they really align with the USDA strategic goals, and many of the work that you do also aligns with those strategic goals. And you will see as you go over these goals, equity, inclusion, stakeholders, diversity are really prominent. We want to make sure that our programs reach the people that, all the people that need those resources and those programs. So next slide, please. I think I'm going to turn it over back to Ashley.
I think it's great. It is. All right. So we're going to deep dive a little bit into NIFA's Food and Agriculture Defense Initiative background and programs. So next slide, please. So the Food and Agriculture Defense Initiative, also referred to as FADI. So each of us joining you today represents a FADI funding opportunity. So we have the Extension Disaster Education Network. That is in my program portfolio, the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, which is in Michelle's portfolio, and then the National Plant Diagnostic Network, which is in Amar's portfolio. It's important to note that last year marked the 20th anniversary of the FADI. And it is also just, I wanted to be clear too, that it is focused on enhancing biosecurity efforts in partnership with land-grant institutions and other institutions. So as you can see on the screen, we've got people, animal, and plants, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail here. So next slide, please. So I'll kick things off with FADI Eden. So I'm thrilled to share that since we put these slides together, we have an RFA. So this is the first time since fiscal year 2018 that the FADI Eden funding opportunity will be competed. So what specifically is this? I alluded to the fact that it's people focused. So this is really working in support with the cooperative extension system across the country with a focus on biosecurity before, during, and after disasters to really enhance our ability to manage those domestic incidents. So I want to be really clear here that Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network, has been around for a really long time, since 1993. It started out as an organic group of extension educators and agents in the North Central region. And so over the years, their work has evolved to really encompass all of cooperative extension. It's been said that Eden is extension and extension is Eden. And so though the FADI project does have some distinct features that really works in support of the network. So the idea, of course, right, has a biosecurity focus, but there are elements of this particular funding opportunity that focus on overall Eden administration, supporting strategic partnerships, engaging in communication, as we know, especially during disasters, before, during, and after. Communication is critical. And then a lot of capacity building and training and development. So we are aiming to make one award in FY23. And as I shared, the RFA is now open. So, and if you go to the next slide. So currently, though, we do have an awardee that is working to finish out their previous award, and that is Purdue University. And so just to highlight kind of the flair of what they've been doing this past year, is focusing on identifying kind of a roadmap for the FATI work within Extension. And so they're organizing focus area working groups to develop white papers that the intent they're hoping is to be able to be kind of a catalyst to secure or at least seek out additional funding opportunities to support their work. Important to know that Eden has really aimed to be inclusive to disaster education across the land-grant system. So there is an Eden 1890s advisory group. So that is working with those 1890 land-grant institutions to really focus on underserved audiences and the needs that they may have during disasters. Related to this, their work in exploring how to better collaborate with our 1994 or those tribal colleges and universities, those land-grant institutions, to really focus on disaster and build those strong local partnerships and collaborations. And then as I shared too, right, communication, it all centers back on that. And so there is an element there to really organize and coordinate, collaborate around strong, thoughtful communication across a unified cooperative extension service. Next slide.
All right, so the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, NIFA is a partner with the USDA Animal Plant Health Inspection Service for the NALM. And APHIS is really the lead USDA agency in the NALM because they own and operate the USDA confirmatory laboratories on this. But because of the FATI funding, NIFA partners with APHIS. And we fund several of the NALM labs in partnership with APHIS. But the NALM itself is a state-federal partnership of diagnostic laboratories designed to protect the nation from animal disease threats by providing surveillance, early detection, mitigation, and recovery functions. Right now, many of the NALM laboratories are very busy responding to high-path avian influenza, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But in terms of how the program functions, there are 3 levels of diagnostic labs within the NALM, 1, 2, and 3, that are designated based on what capabilities each lab has, what level of communication function, what diseases they can test, et cetera. And the labs are funded based on their levels. And you can see the levels of funding there that I believe are last year's funding levels. So this year, NIFA is funding 17 labs, and we'll get our RFA out in the near future to do that funding in partnership with APHIS. And if we go to the next slide, so this shows the current NALM laboratories. There are 60 laboratories currently distributed across 42 states. That's 32 level 1 laboratories, 23 level 2, 4 level 3, and then there's 1 affiliate lab that does not receive funding, and that's the USGS National Wildlife Health Center in Madison, Wisconsin. And we go to the next slide. So just a little bit about different surveillance programs for animal diseases. I'm not going to read this list to you, but this just gives you an example of what some of those surveillance programs are. And I will point out 2 things. The NALM has had for quite some time a pilot program related to antimicrobial resistance that's getting ready to be turned into a full-time program across the NALM. And in addition to that, during the pandemic, there were many NALM labs that actually got CLIA certified to do COVID testing so that they could support their state diagnostic labs to do human testing, and then also to do some of the animal testing as well. And I'll talk a little bit about how that worked in terms of coordination between the human and animal labs after Amr goes. So I will turn it over to Amr.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So the National Plant Diagnostic Network that I will refer to as NPDN had also celebrated its 20-year anniversary last year. And it's a network that is comprised mostly of state, federal, and university partnerships. And really the network is based on the work that the plant diagnostic clinics have done. So those plant diagnostic clinics existed before the network started, and you will find many of these clinics in land-grant universities, and they really partner with the extension system and also with grower associations and with the private sector, with industry as well. So NPDN is present in 50 states and 4 territories. So these are the labs that comprise the network, more than 70 labs. And the major role of the network is to provide diagnostics and identification services for growers and farmers, but also for APHIS and other federal and state collaborators as well. And I will say the relationship with the APHIS is really important. So APHIS helps with the certification and accreditation of the labs, especially for regulated pathogens. And also they help with training of the diagnosticians. But the relationship is a two-way relationship. So sometimes when APHIS doesn't have enough capacity to detect the regulated pests, NPDN helps with the surge detection as well. So it's a real partnership. And we completed NPDN for the first time last year. So we have total of 6 awards. And if we go to the next slide, right? So those 6 awards cover 5 regional centers, as you see depicted on this map with a different color. And each state will have at least one plant disease clinic, and there will be a hub lab for the state. And usually the lead awardee has management responsibility for the hub lab and also for the regional network as well. And all these networks, they communicate with each other, and it's important to have that communication. If one pathogen is detected, the information is shared across the network. There are safeguards about the information. So we have an IT data repository. So to make sure that no misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation is out there. We know how much this could create issues with the public. So everything is also coordinated with the state plant regulatory officers at each state. And also if there's a regulated pest that is detected, the sample is also confirmed by the APHIS lab. So it's a real collaborative effort. If we go to the next slide, please. So the major goals of NPDN is to conduct and deliver quality diagnosis, and as I mentioned, the communication, but a major role is also professional development. There's always a need for diagnosticians to also build new skills for diagnosticians. We know technology evolves, so we do need to keep our diagnosticians updated, but also the network trains first detectors. These could be growers, they could be extension officers in the field, so they are trained on at least symptom diagnosis and how to collect the samples and send them to the disease clinic. Gonna give you a couple statistics in here. So during last year, more than 700,000 samples were processed by the network, and over 20 common techniques ranging from imagery to biological assays, to microbiological cultures, to microscopy, serology, and molecular techniques have been used with an average of 1.7 tests per sample. If you go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
So just a little bit about the Integrated Consortium of Laboratory Networks. So the ICLN was established by a memorandum of agreement in June of 2005. And the goal here was to provide a nationwide integrated system of the federal laboratory networks to assist in responding to acts of terrorism and other events requiring an integrated laboratory response. So you'll see on that lower level of the eye chart that's on the slide, the NALN, the NPDN, and also the FERN, which is the Food Emergency Response Network, which is another USDA lab network in which NIFA does not participate, but the Food Safety Inspection Service co-leads with the HHS's Food and Drug Administration. But you also see the Defense Laboratory Network, CDC's Laboratory Response Network, EPA's Environmental Response Laboratory Network, and FDA's Veterinary Laboratory Investigation and Response Network. So every month, these laboratory networks all meet through what's called the Network Coordination Group to share lessons learned and collaborate across multiple different topics you see identified under these subgroups and working groups to talk about issues such as methods detection, interlaboratory comparability, COVID-19 lessons learned was a big topic of discussion recently, sample prioritization, and then there is a joint leadership council that is coordinates at a higher level across the interagency that meets on a much more infrequent basis to ensure that all the labs are on the same page from a leadership perspective as well. The ICLN itself is led through the Department of Homeland Security. And right now that leadership is within the new Office of Health Security. So DHS just reorganized again, and DHS, OHS leads the ICLN. And if we go to the next slide, Ashley and Amr are now going to spend a couple of minutes talking about a few security or disaster related competitive opportunities. And then I will close us out talking about how to apply for said opportunities. So I will turn it over to, I think Amr is the next one.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, Greg. So one of the programs we wanted to highlight to you today is the Agricultural Biosecurity, the AFRI 11 program that Michelle and I co-lead. And this is a cross-cutting program supported by both the Plant Systems Protection Division and the Animal Systems Division. So this program area focuses on increasing the U.S. national capacity to prevent, rapidly detect, and respond to biological threats to U.S. agriculture. And applicants will need to focus on at least one of the subcategories listed on this slide: the detection, diagnosis, surveillance, and forecasting for transboundary pests and diseases, either in the plant or animal system, or a combination of the two. And the second one is the rapid response to and recovery from such pests and diseases. We do support projects with research projects up to $650,000 with the possibility of an additional $150,000 for specific partnerships. And what I mean by specific partnerships is the lead will work with a minority serving institution or an international partner, and that partner will get the $150,000 to be part of this project. The benefit of the work should be for U.S. agriculture. So we also support integrated projects, meaning research, education, and or extension. And these are up to $1 million per project with the possibility of the $150,000 additional partnership support. We also support seed grants for up to $300,000. And we also have the coordination network up to 1 million as well. Additionally, we also support conference grants up to $50,000. The application deadline is August 10th of this year. And if you have any, your stakeholders, your partners have any questions, don't hesitate to contact Michelle and I. You can go to the next slide. So we just wanted to give you some information about where we get our awards. So as you see from this map, or what this map is showing you, is really a wide range of states and that have been awarded. And this is also reflective of the diversity of applicants as well. And if you want to get more information about the projects that we have funded, we've included also the link on this slide. You can access the abstracts of all of these funded proposals and also a little bit of information on their methodology as well. So next slide. We wanted to show you a bit of, diversity of the projects that we have funded. And this program started in '98, so we're on our 5th year. The first year we had one project to Kansas State University, and this was focused on creating a coordination network that that we call the Tactical Sciences Coordination Network that is bringing together NPDN, Eden, NOM, the regional IPM centers, WADAP, and other programs to foster that collaboration to identify challenges and also identify areas of collaboration. So, and I'm not going to go through the details of each project, but as we have on this slide, we have projects focusing on detection diagnosis in the plant or animal system, and also on response to such pests and diseases. And again, if you would like to have more information on each of these projects, you can check the link on the previous slide. So if we can go to the next slide. I'm going to turn to Ashley.
All right, it's back to me. So I get to share about one of our newest AFRI cross-cutting program priority areas. That is the Rapid Response to Extreme Weather Events program. So this was launched in last fiscal year, and it really became about because of stakeholder feedback and NIFA recognizing that we didn't have any funding opportunity that was really responsive. So just to be very certain, this is not an assistance program, but rather this is a competitive funding opportunity that seeks applications that are focused on critical and urgent solutions. So they're tied to extreme weather and disasters and address specific impacts on our food and agricultural systems. I think what's really important about this program is that it focuses on extension and applied work. So we're looking at single function, extension or outreach projects, as well as extension-led research projects, because we want to see those outputs that are produced by these projects in the hands of those end users or those targeted stakeholders. So applicants have an opportunity to clearly define the geographic scope of their project as it relates to an extreme weather event or a disaster. This program is particularly unique because we have a rolling application deadline. So this is an opportunity for researchers and extension folks to come together when something happens. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we recognize, right, that sometimes weather presents, I don't want to say an opportunity, but it presents a condition that needs to be studied or needs to be addressed. And so we're looking for applications that address the following emphasis areas: agro-ecosystem resilience, food safety, nutrition security, and agricultural commodity security, as well as health, well-being, and safety. Next slide, please. So as I shared, right, very much an extension or outreach or focus. So these well-developed extension and outreach activities are really critical in successful applications, right? That extension-led research, that applied focus, and really about reaching, right, the people who need that information. So some examples of recently funded projects, just like Amra was sharing, we do have a list of projects as well that we funded through A1712. And you can see here, just at least in the three that we've highlighted, that they address very different and unique incidents, right? In Kentucky, the floods that happened late last summer, New Mexico, addressing both wildfire and flooding conditions as it relates to tracking livestock and caring for livestock. And then finally, drought in Louisiana. So you can see here, it really does address a wide variety of incidents. We also have several projects that we funded that deal with hurricanes as well. Next slide, please.
All right, so as I've mentioned several times, now I get to talk about what things to consider when looking at applying for NIFA funding opportunities. So if we go to the next slide, just two websites to keep in mind when looking at applications. The first one is the NIFA events calendar. That includes upcoming deadlines, meetings, and webinars. And so the web link is right there. One thing to keep in mind is that for every request for applications or RFA that we post, NIFA will now be doing a technical assistance webinar, and the notification for those technical assistance webinars will be posted on this events calendar. So a pretty important place to keep an eye out on. And then the second link is the upcoming request for applications calendar. And one important thing to note about the RFA calendar is that the way that it's currently organized is the pending or the soon to be announced RFAs are at the top. So you see a bunch of ones that are coming up with their dates, like when you might want to check back, but they're all just words, no links, because they aren't posted yet. To see the ones that are actually active, you need to scroll down to the bottom of the page. They're all at the bottom of the page. So the real information you want, the ones you can apply for right now, down at the bottom, so scroll down. If we go to the next slide. So things to consider when you're looking at applying for a grant. The first thing I will say, and I will probably say it multiple times throughout this application, is read the RFA. So if you want to learn about the funding opportunities, you need to read what's in the RFA. So Amr and Ashley both did part of that work for you by putting some of the information that is in the RFA on the slides that they just presented for A1181 Ag Biosecurity and 1712. Rapid response to extreme weather events, but there's more information in that RFA. And I think the really important thing to point out is that in that RFA, if you read it, that's all the information that is going to be used by the panel when evaluating your proposal. So reading the RFA is really important. If there's one that you're considering applying for and it's not posted yet, then consider going back to the previous year's RFA and taking a look at that, because that will at least give you a good idea of what you can expect for when they post the new RFA. But make sure you read the new RFA when it does come out as well. Start a conversation, talk to others, tell them you're interested in applying. Organizational leaders within your organization, your grants team, but also when the RFA is posted, there is usually a program contact within NIFA. So if you have questions about whether your idea is a fit for that RFA, reach out to those program contacts. That's why we're there. That is literally our job. So if you have questions, reach out to us and ask us after you've read the RFA. Start building your team. Many of our RFAs require interdisciplinary approaches. So if this isn't a solo approach and you're going to need to build a team to put in a proposal, start having those conversations early. Don't try and do everything at the last minute. Start having those conversations. Share your ideas and brainstorm. Discuss what's going to go into your proposal so that when you start writing, you have all that lined up. And then start preparing your documents. And that's one of the things we talk to people with the rapid response program about a lot. You can apply within 30 days of a disaster, but that doesn't mean that you have to wait until the disaster to start putting your documents together. It's not when, it's not if, it's when. So you can always start working with your sponsor program office and get some of your paperwork in order before the RFA, before the disaster hits, right? So if we can go to the next slide. So some things to consider when you are applying and submitting. Make sure you're aware NIFA only accepts electronic submission of applications and only through grants.gov with only one exception, and that's the veterinary medicine loan repayment program. So the grants application guide is available at this link, and it looks like that screenshot on the other side of the slide. And the application documents must be in PDF format to be accepted by NIFA. That includes your narrative and budget justification. So even if you prepare them in Word, make sure that you convert them to PDF. Grants.gov will allow you to upload other formats. Don't be tempted. Make sure you put them in PDF. We will not accept them. They actually will not import into our system in Word into a valid format. We can't read them. And so if you wait until the last minute, submit your grant at the last date, and then it's in a Word document, your grant will not be accepted. If we go to the next slide. So once it's in, you've been successful, you've read the RFA, you've submitted everything as a PDF, and it's in the system, then what happens? So the evaluation process. We put everything through a panel process, and your proposals are assigned for review to at least 3 reviewers with expertise in your proposed topic. And this is another conversation you can have with the National Program Leader, because that expertise sometimes varies depending on the panel. So A1181, Ag Biosecurity, we're a cross-cutting panel. We have plant and animal subject matter experts on our panel. And so in that case, your proposal may have someone with a really close match to your particular proposal, but it also may have someone, if your proposal is related to African swine fever diagnostics, you may have someone who, does, works in a diagnostic lab. You may have someone with a background in swine medicine, but not necessarily diagnostics. And then you may have someone who works at in an NPDN lab who has a good molecular diagnostic background, but not working with swine. And it's important to kind of understand that when you're writing your grant so you can write appropriately. But they will have expertise related to your proposal. It just may vary depending on the panel, what type of expertise. The reviewers will produce individual reviews of each proposal, evaluating the strengths and weaknesses. Those written reviews will be used at the beginning of panel discussions to discuss with the entire panel. And then through those discussions and the peer review panelists will come to a consensus on the final rating and ranking of the proposal. And that rating and ranking will be turned into a recommendation for funding within NIFA. If we go to the next page. So what's the tentative timeline once you've submitted your grant? On average, it usually takes about 3 to 5 months. That's not a guarantee. There's always things that may interfere. But usually the way things work is we have the request for application release. There's 1 to 2 months for writing and planning. The applications are due. And then there's another 1 to 2 months. We try and give peer reviewers sufficient time to actually do their due diligence when reviewing your proposals. And then we need time in-house to process and do the awards processing, make sure all the paperwork's in, get the final IACUC, Institutional Animal Care and Use, and any institutional review board if there's human subjects involved, and get all the awards finalized and publish the award announcements. We go to the next page. If you are really interested in the nuts and bolts of how panel works, or if you've applied and not been successful in the past and really want to understand the panel discussions and the nature of a panel in particular program area priority, or if you really just want to do service to research in general, one thing I would really encourage you to do is volunteer to become a panelist. You can either do it through scanning the QR code or following the link. But we are always looking for panelists to serve on our panels. And when you go, this will take you to our peer review system page. So you can click on the link that says click here to volunteer to be a panelist. It'll ask you to fill out information about yourself. If you've already been a panelist but are interested in serving on a new panel, there's a way to update your information so you can add that panel to your interests. And that way it indicates which panels you might be interested in serving on. And this is a system that we search and our panel managers can search when we're looking for new panelists when panel time comes around. My boss yelled at me earlier this week when we were doing our presentations. When you do serve on panel, there is an honorarium. I believe it's $265 a day now. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not just totally volunteer service. There is some remuneration for that service. And most of our panels right now for 2023 are virtual. So you don't have to leave the comfort of your home or your office. If you go to the next slide. So as Amr mentioned, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accommodation are something that are really important to both NIFA and USDA. So this slide is in here to make sure that people are aware of the importance of that. If anyone has encountered any difficulties either in accessing this presentation or in accessing any of our programs, we remain committed to making those accessible. We are able to provide language translation services or other accommodations as necessary. And that third paragraph contains information to request those accommodations and or file a complaint, should it be necessary, or you can request that from any of the three of us. But if we go to the next slide, I believe we are happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Well, I know we've got somebody that's coming in here in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I apologize, but then.
Then we timed that right.
I'm sorry. So I have an opportunity to get over to Disaster City. I think, Heather, you're the only one going from our crew, so can you make sure they get there safely?
Yeah.
All right. Just pull into lot 96 and have them follow you there since they're going to be heading off to Houston after this. Just a real quick question. The GCC, I didn't see a role for DHS. Are they members or?
They're members of the GCC.
But they're not part of the leadership. It's USDA and FDA.
That's correct.
Good. All right. And then I guess the, one other question I was going to come up with, which I'm afraid maybe out of time on. I was going to ask about REE and NIFA leadership. Who's at the helm these days? Is Shavonda
So Dr. Jacobs Young is the Undersecretary for REE Research Extension and Economics. And Dr. Dion Toombs is currently the Acting Director for NIFA.
Okay, all right. Those are my big questions, just burning together. So if there's anyone in the audience that has a question, we certainly would try to take it. If we can't get it answered in the next minute, we'll make sure that it gets answered later. So if you want, you can just drop it in the chat box and we will call this the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely.